Good morning, everyone. Good morning. I'm Shelley Poticha, the Director of the Office of Sustainable Housing and Communities, and I want to welcome you to the Department of Housing and Urban Development. And I understand we had some early birds here this morning. Thank you for being so prompt. It's going to really make it possible to get a lot done over the next day and a half, 2 days. And I hope you take advantage of our lovely facilities here. We have a coffee shop, we have a cafeteria. If you have your pass, you can go outside and across to the shopping mall, which has actual food. Anyway, it's really wonderful for you to come, visit with us, and spend the time. And we have a lot planned for the next day and a half. Let's just, for a moment, I know you've all been talking for a little while, but we have almost all of our 2011 grantees here today, representatives from almost all of our grants, from the Regional Planning Grant Program and the Community Challenge Planning Grant Program, small and large places, big urban places, very rural places. And just to get a sense of who's in the room, I'm going to ask you to stand up a couple of times. So for those who are here representing a regional planning grant program, could you just stand up so we can see who you are? Yeah. Great. Excellent. Thank you. And for those who are here for the Community Challenge Grant, I guess that's sort of everybody else, but thank you. That is so great. And so if you are east of the Mississippi, stand up, please. Oh, pretty good. Pretty good. And then west of the Mississippi. That's pretty good. That's good coverage. And then I'm wondering, are there some folks that are in the room who maybe got a different grant in 2010 and you're back again for more punishment? Anybody in that category? Got a couple overlaps, but great. Okay. And so we've got really a lot to look forward to, and the next 2 days are going to be a lot of nuts and bolts. Administering a successful grant program, we've really learned a lot over the last year and a bit, and you guys get the benefit of all that learning. You're going to build on our platform. It's going to probably help tremendously in terms of the work that folks last year really, I think in some ways, struggled through. You all are going to learn about how to make this program as successful as possible. And we're really here to help you do that. This is really a program where you're a partner with us. We want to make sure you succeed. We want to make sure that you're able to achieve your goals. Of course, you're working with the federal government, which is always a little tricky, but we're going to try and smooth that as much as we possibly can. So that's a lot of what we're going to be talking about during this time together. But I wanted to take a few minutes this morning and sort of remind us of the big picture. Why did we even get into this work? What are we really trying to achieve? How does an organization like HUD look at this work? And how what we're trying to see as outcomes from this initiative. So what I thought I would do is just do a very short presentation, and then we're going to bring up some of my colleagues from DOT, EPA, and the U.S. Department of Agriculture. So, and we'll have a conversation, so make sure that you're thinking about questions. We want to make sure this is as informative and useful as it possibly can be for you. And let's start. So what is a sustainable community? Well, one of the things that this initiative has really done is take the notion of sustainability out of the pure realm of environmental sustainability. And it recognizes that every community that we're coming from is different. It has a different set of issues, a different set of needs. And what we want to make sure we do through this program is address the challenges that are going to make sure that your communities are economically thriving, are paying attention to the taxpayer needs in terms of infrastructure costs, not being too burdensome, making sure that the cost of living in our communities is as reasonable as possible, making sure that we're thinking about the land and the air and the water that we have in our communities. We want to make sure that we're thinking holistically about the long-term resilience of our communities. And so Secretary Sean Donovan, this quote here I think is really important because it talks about how we need to make sure that we're tying the quality and location of housing to broader opportunities. We want to make sure that everyone in our community can benefit from the investments that we're making from the public realm and from the private sector. And it also makes sure that we think about balancing competing interests as much as we possibly can. Many of you have probably seen this slide in preparation for the application process, but I thought I'd sort of bring it up again because this is really a touchstone for us. One of the things that we are enormously proud of is that our leadership here, Secretary Donovan, Secretary LaHood, and Administrator Jackson, in 2009, they were asked to come speak to the Senate Banking Committee right when the Obama administration was starting and talk about what their goals were going to be for this term. And instead of going off separately and having their speechwriters write a speech and then showing up and making that speech, they actually got together and they put together a coordinated plan for how they were going to work together. And it all builds on the notion of how we ought to agree to a set of principles. Here we call them the livability principles. And those principles are guiding our policy making, our investment strategies, and the way that we work with communities. And you know these principles quite well, but they are groundbreaking for the federal government. And let me just call out a few ways in which they have really moved us forward tremendously over the last almost 3 years. So provide more transportation choices. I know that there are many of you who come from metropolitan planning organizations, primarily from a transportation background. This notion that we ought to be thinking about comprehensive transportation options in our community is something, it's a conversation that's happening real live time in our communities. Also, we're seeing increasingly in small towns, rural areas, the need to make sure that folks can get to the doctor, get to services, have those options maybe when they can't drive or can't afford to drive. We ought to be thinking more comprehensively about our transportation systems. But for HUD, that was actually a groundbreaking agreement to get on board with a set of livability principles that said we ought to make sure that our communities have transportation options. HUD never previously had thought about whether it benefited our clients, low-income households, disadvantaged households, whether they might benefit from being able to take a bus or a train or walk or bike to a potential job or a service area. So just that first principle really begins to show that we're starting to think in ways that are more integrated. Promote equitable and affordable housing. Again, sounds just like the mission of the Department of Housing and Urban Development, but again, linking up with the Department of Transportation was groundbreaking in that it asked members of their agency, particularly the Federal Transit Administration, to think about ways in which their investments might change the opportunities for people to actually live and work in areas with convenient transit options. The third principle, enhance economic competitiveness. Now, what I always say to folks is that we think, when we hear that term, sustainability, we instantly go to clean air, clean land, and clean water. And those are really important criteria. But what we really need to be doing in our communities is making sure that we can have prosperous, resilient economies, that people can feel secure that there'll be jobs available, that in a small town, for instance, we are thinking regularly about making sure that there are opportunities for younger people to come back into our communities and have a job that allows them to live in a community that really fits with their notion of their quality of life. And increasingly in this initiative, we're seeing more and more efforts to align the kind of typical land use, transportation, infrastructure planning with an economic development strategy that really identifies how we're going to promote job development in our communities, how we're going to think about diversifying economies, and how we're going to make sure that the infrastructure that we're investing in, which is enormously expensive, really fits that broader set of goals of economic development. So our fourth principle here, support existing communities. This again is explicitly stated to make sure that we are not promoting a top-down strategy. We want to make sure that we are investing in communities where they are now. We want to make sure that people in communities are putting forward the ideas that promote livability and sustainability. And we also want to make sure that we're using our infrastructure and existing communities as much as we possibly can. One of the worries that we have is that we are continually expanding infrastructure out, without continually reinvesting in existing places. And that is becoming very, very expensive. It is often the conversation that is really starting to bring people together because tax rates have gotten so high as we just continue to move outward and outward without thinking about the high cost of providing services in our communities. Our fifth principle, coordinate policies and leverage investments. That's really at the heart of what the federal government is trying to do with this initiative. We all talk regularly about this problem that we have where we work in separate silos. And we don't talk to each other. We don't even know what the programs are in our sister agencies. And as a result, we're seeing a health clinic built over here and a bunch of housing built over here without the transportation options for people to be able to get to that health clinic. And so the more that we work to try and share knowledge about what we're investing in different communities, we're going to hear from our colleagues at the other federal agencies in a few minutes about how we are trying to team up to review applications for discretionary grant programs and do that together, which, by the way, there were 12 federal agencies involved in reviewing your applications. So this really is a demonstration of that look at how we can align and leverage. And what is coming from that, the exposure that DOT, EPA, USDA, FEMA, Commerce, National Endowment for the Arts, Health and Human Services, when they look at these grants, they're starting to see what's going on in our communities, what's happening that people are concerned about. And you, in your arguments that you made for receiving these grants, were the most explicit about how we need to tie these items together. We need to make sure that we're thinking about comprehensive community revitalization. And so increasingly over the last year, we're seeing other federal agencies pile on. Now that they know what you're trying to do, they're intrigued. They're now looking for ways to leverage and align their funding to support you. And so we'll continue to talk about that throughout the grant program. And then number 6, I spoke a little bit about this just a minute ago, but valuing communities and neighborhoods. I think one of the strategies that we think is enormously important for this program is the recognition that you know what is best for your communities. We are not going to tell you what to do. We're not going to tell you what the answer is before you get there. That's your challenge. We have a set of broad objectives that we are looking for in this program. They're laid out through these livability principles we're going to talk about, performance measurement over the next day or so, but really it's up to you. You know what is best for your community and how you talk about this, where you put your emphasis, what the specific solutions are. We don't think the federal government has a role in that. That's really where you ought to be leading. So again, trying to step away from this notion that has been a kind of theme behind federal programs for decades, and making sure that we're a better partner with you. So here is a slide that we talk about the partnership as it's emerging. And each one of our agencies, the core agencies in the partnership, has brought forward a set of programs that we are excuse me, aligning with this initiative. We're going to talk a little bit more about preferred sustainability status as we move forward with the program. But these programs that are identified here are the programs that have the most potential to really support the implementation of the work that you are doing here. We also have been working for the past year and a half with the Department of Agriculture, and they have been an enormously supportive partner because, you know, for all of you who have large regions that extend from the core out to the rural lands around your region, there's a role for the Department of Agriculture in that. For those of you who are from small towns and rural areas, you know that generally the Department of Agriculture has been your prime partner. So we have now worked with USDA to make sure that we're in sync, that the state directors know about this program, and that we can work in a more seamless way. And then we also have the Department of Commerce and the Economic Development Administration, the group that really supports economic development planning and also a linkage to business recruitment in your communities. So again, trying to make sure that we have the linkages here at the federal level so that when you're actually tackling problems locally, you've got a contact. And we're going to hear this morning from 3 of our partners, Lily Schaup from the Department of Transportation, Matt Dalby from US EPA, and Chris Beck from USDA, and we'll hear them just in a few minutes. Now, this is a map of all of the Sustainable Communities grantees from the partner agencies. For those of you who are in you can see the dark green blobs there. Those are those of you who are here representing regional planning grants. And let me see if I can, and then for those of you who are in kind of a orange tan color, not sure how I can explain that, those are community challenge grants. These other grants represent choice neighborhoods, another HUD program, and there's some places that are lined up here. I know the folks from Opelika are here. Tiger grants from DOT, a range of brownfield and technical assistance grants from EPA, Federal Transit Administration grants, clean water, revolving loan programs. We're trying as much as we can to line this up, but you can see there's a tremendous coverage in just this 1 year. And for representing you, we've got 152 Sustainable Communities grants over 2 years. So that represents 2010 and 2011. And I think in your binder you have a map in one of the last tabs highlighting the 2 years of grants, and as well as a bunch of summaries of the projects that we're funding this year. Now, quickly, the demand for this program has been enormously strong. And we actually, I think we've received something like 1,500 applications for this program, and we've only been able to fund about 11% of the applications. You guys are the best of the best. I mean, the competition for this program has been phenomenal, and you made the cut. So you ought to really congratulate yourselves for that, because it is really challenging to apply for federal funds, particularly in a program that's sort of like a race to the top framing. You know, we're really asking a lot from you, and we know that. We do not have funding for fiscal year 12. Congress wasn't able to do that, so we're not going to be doing a competition this year. We're hoping in fiscal year 13 that Congress will give us the ability to move forward and do this again, because we are seeing a tremendous, as I said, demand for this effort, and we're also seeing, as grantees move forward in their work, if you're a regional planning grantee and you came in, you're here with a Category 1 grant, getting started on putting your plan together, you may see the need at some point to apply for a community challenge grant to be able to focus on a specific area in your region that really is ready to move forward and develop a plan for that area. Or you may see the need to come back for a Category 2 grant once you've gotten your first plan together. So any support that you can provide us would be more than welcome, because we know that this is going to be a really tough year. Let me just quickly talk a little bit about what we're trying to do and what we're seeing in the 2010 grantees. And this might, you know, we can continue to talk about this over these 2 days. We can also help you connect in through our capacity building networks with other grantees that are taking on some of the same issues you're taking on. As you might expect, transportation is a major component of these grants, and they range from looking at regional strategies to link up housing with economic development opportunities. A lot of the regions that are in our first year of grantees are finding out that their regional transportation system does a pretty good job of linking neighborhoods, but often they don't make that last mile to the employment centers. And so one of the things that our grantees are looking at is how to make that connection more tight. We're seeing a lot of corridor planning, station area planning, Main Street planning, town center planning, a lot of codes and plans that'll help make sure that as the market returns, private investment is able to move forward to actually building communities. They aren't having to go back in and ask for code changes that would allow these projects to happen. And a whole array of complete streets efforts geared toward making sure that we're building and designing our communities to allow, again, those transportation options in all kinds of different settings. Economic development, as I mentioned earlier, is really becoming the leading edge of what communities are doing. I know many of you are focusing on economic development, job creation as one of the core values that you're bringing forward in this work, and it often requires building new partnerships. We're seeing that the folks, again, who work on the land use and transportation side often don't know the folks who are working in economic development. They haven't made the connections with chambers of commerce or business leaders. Some of you have done that. I'm sure over the time that we're working together, we're going to see more and more of those connections happen, because as we see the business community get behind these livability strategies, we are seeing implementation of them accelerate. A big part, again, of what is happening in these plans is the notion that we ought to be looking for opportunities to catalyze private investments. How can the public sector, for example, do their part to set the table for private investment in a particular corridor, in a downtown area, in a small town? Again, looking at ways in which we ought to set the table so as private investments are ready in the marketplace, they're able to move fairly quickly. And again, the whole notion that we ought to be thinking about engaging people in our communities as much as we possibly can and in a constructive way is key to what you're going to be hearing from your GTRs, the grant technical representatives. We want to make sure that you have a consensus in your community about the vision that you're trying to create. And we have seen over and over that when you engage with people in communities in an authentic way, let them be part of this process, you not only get a stronger union moving forward together, but you also learn a lot of things that help you course correct along the way. And so we think that this community participation effort is actually an accelerator for implementation. It may take some additional work up front, but it is so worth it. And that's why these funds do that. It's one of the few sources of federal funds that will pay for that extensive outreach to people in communities. So in closing, I just want to mention three things that I think are particularly important. As we are here sitting in this sort of unusual spot at the national level, we're seeing some real changes happen. And we want to make sure that you're thinking about these sort of mega trends, so to speak, that are likely to come up in your work and also likely to become necessary to focus on at least at some point in your efforts. The reality is that we have to really think about regional economies that are sustainable and resilient. And we talk about that, built to last. And one of the things that really has been a challenge in many communities, I came from the state of Oregon and grew up when the timber industry collapsed. And we were caught flat-footed. We didn't have a diversified economy. We didn't have what you now hear about, all the high-tech companies and businesses coming in all different sectors to diversify what used to be a single industry economy. And now, state of Oregon, I think, is really recognized as one of the places that has changed itself and made its economy more resilient. Part of the way they did that is by focusing on the quality of place, making sure that as you think about planning in your communities, in your town centers, with the people that are making private investments, that you're thinking about how to ensure that they're able to attract and retain talent. And part of that ingredient is making sure that it's a wonderful place to live, where their kids can go to school, they can bike ride, they can have an easy and enjoyable life. And as the more that we think about the quality of place, we're seeing that that becomes a real attractor to the private sector. This is actually some work from Sacramento where they're looking at their assets. The Sacramento, California region is right next to Central Valley, America's breadbasket, and yet most of the food is exported from that region. Most of the processing for the food is not done in the Central Valley. And so their plan is actually looking at how they can support food processing facilities in some of the small towns around the edge of the region, the rural farming towns, and making sure that there are job opportunities in those communities that actually build on their natural assets. So I would urge you to look at that kind of example. Another reality, I think I mentioned it earlier, is communities are going broke. They cannot afford the infrastructure costs that we have to pay to continue to extend water, sewer, fire, school services out at the periphery. This is an example of Salt Lake region, one of our grantees from last year, where they found that if they focused planned growth into existing communities at densities that were consistent with the marketplace, not trying to increase beyond what the market was already going to provide, they would actually save $3.4 billion in infrastructure costs. So it's a cost savings idea. And then we'll hear a lot more over the time that we work together about our concern that transportation costs and housing costs are the top two expenditures in communities, for households. Even food is less than just gas, owning a car, insuring it, and paying your mortgage or your rent. And the more that we can think about ways to reduce that expenditure, maybe by making it possible for people to live closer to their jobs, have transportation options to job centers that are less expensive than having a car, that begins to make life more affordable for people in our communities. So let me just close and say I'm really excited to be able to work with you. We have a lot that's going to be coming at you in the next 2 days. Please meet my staff because they're fantastic people, and also because the more you get to know them, the easier it'll be over the next 3 years as we work together. So let me bring up my colleagues to the table. We're going to have a little conversation, and thank you very much. Sure. Are you the moderator?
I can.
I thought you were coming up here to...
Well, I was coming to make a couple announcements.
Oh, okay.
So while they're getting settled in, I want to introduce myself, Dwayne Marsh. I'm a senior advisor here at the Office of Sustainable Housing Communities. You have received a few emails from me. You'll be amazed how many more you'll receive over the next couple of years. I am the person who ends up kind of channeling the directives from the GTR to you guys as you think through executing the program. Before the panel gets started, though, a couple of things. Our most recent policy guidance just came out around what allowable food costs there are. And for the 10 grantees, this was a revelation, and they were quite excited. Unfortunately, we don't allow food in the auditorium. So if you have any drinks or coffees that kept you alive and well at the early going, we're going to ask if first break you can remove those from the auditorium because they are very particular about making sure we keep the place nice and tidy. I do want to thank the people who made this possible as we get underway. And Naomi Friedman, who is our newest GTR and our communication liaison, is over here behind the panel. She was coordinating the day's events. Jermaine Walker was here almost as early as some of you guys who got here at 7:15 this morning to make sure you could get to the desks. And then our GTR team, who you'll meet throughout the day. Maria Zimmerman, our deputy director, is here. And then James Norsworthy and Deborah Rohn, who are our grant officers. And we even have a few people in absentia on rotation and detail who contributed to today's success. If you don't meet everybody by the time the day is over or tomorrow's over, that means we didn't do our job well. So I think, Shelley, with that, we can turn the panel to you. Okay. One thing we're going to do from session to session is give you guys a chance to introduce yourselves, and we're going to do it in small clusters so you actually have a chance to remember some of the names. So at the end of this panel, we'll give a chance for some of you to make yourselves known to the crowd.
Great. And we're going to sort of do this partnership style where we're a little more loose than most of those stuffy federal staffers. Anyway, I thought we'd have a little bit of a conversation, and then we'll open it up for questions. And this session is being taped, so we're going to ask you, if you can, to go up to the mic, just so that we get your thoughts or comments on the recording. So, Lily, let's start with you. Lily Schaup is with the Office of the Secretary at the Department of Transportation. They have been tremendous partners throughout this effort. And Lily, tell us a little bit about what you see your role in this is.
Sure. Well, it's always exciting to be on these panels because I feel I could have given that PowerPoint presentation myself this morning. In fact, I recognize some of those slides. And that's one of the great things really about this partnership, is that when you get one of us, you really get all of us there at the table. Those partnership livability principles are really reflected in the DOT programs and policies the same way they are in the HUD or the EPA ones as well. So at the Department of Transportation, as Shelley said, I work in the Secretary's office, which is where the DOT Tiger program is operated out of. And we've really tried hard to make that Tiger program reflect the hard work that folks like you are doing to do better and more integrated community planning. So in this latest round of Tiger, we've made sure to include references to the HUD programs in that notice of funding availability, and call out and give special consideration to projects that are resulted from those integrated planning efforts. Within DOT, Secretary LaHood is very, very supportive of the Partnership for Sustainable Communities. This is one of his favorite initiatives of this administration, and really a hallmark of his time at DOT. He's really made it such an effort within the agency to make a fundamental shift in the way we do business. In the past, the Department of Transportation has been really focused on the interstate highway system and moving people fast, getting people as fast as you can from point A to point B. And what Secretary LaHood has really tried to drive home is that it's creating places, and places where people want to stop, shop, buy a few things, maybe mingle and buy a cup of coffee. And creating good places starts with good transportation. So we've, at the department and working with our EPA and HUD colleagues, really taken this to heart. The department is a full member of the regional engagement team, and we've been working with our division, Federal Highways Division officers and our regional staff to make sure they're aware of all of the grants, both from EPA and HUD, and working to actively support the successful implementation of those grants.
And so maybe I could just, for the audience, you know, we meet here on a weekly basis every Wednesday, 4 to 5:30. The partnership meets, and it's primarily folks from headquarters. But we are trying to create, through the regional engagement team, mini partnership teams at the local level, at the regional level, with representation from Federal Highways, Federal Transit Administration, EPA, USDA, and other federal agencies that are interested in this. So that you all, as you're doing your work, have a more local point of contact than just, you know, headquarters. So that's when Lily mentions the regional engagement teams, that's what we're talking about.
Sure. Which is actually very important at the Department of Transportation, because the majority of our funding goes through formula programs that go directly to states. And so state departments of transportation really control the majority of our program funding. So these regional partnerships are critical to creating that culture change. I can keep going, or if you'd like to just do a conversation.
Why don't we move on and we'll circle back. Yeah. So Matt Dalby works in the Office of Sustainable Communities at EPA, a group that has actually been in existence for over a decade, and in this administration, I think a symbol of partnership, changed their name to be lined up with what HUD is doing so that we can really show a united face.
Thank you, Shelley. Good morning, everyone. I'm just counting off all of the angles that have already been taken away from me. Starting on. Actually, before I get going, I want to say hi to Bart and Kelly, because from up in Buffalo. I saw you all 2 weeks ago, and I think, just like Lily said just a couple moments ago, you'll see that the things that I talked about when I was at Buffalo are the same things that Shelley was talking about. In fact, I used a bunch of Shelley's slides when I was up there, right? Which is the things that we do. So good morning again. I'm really pleased to be here. I'd just like to talk a little bit about what we do at EPA and why we do that. I suspect that many of you all know that, or maybe you don't, the agency's mission is to protect human health and clean air and clean water. We do that in a variety of ways at the agency, mostly through statute, like the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act. But we also, since the mid-90s, actually, since the mid part of the Clinton administration, we've been working on land use because, as you all know, we know that the way we use our land impacts the quality of our environment. If we reuse previously developed sites, we can accommodate growth in those places rather than turning people's apple orchards into development with pavement and compacted soils, which cause a variety of environmental challenges. We know that if we grow more compactly, we'll provide people with choices on how they can get around, including walking and biking. We know that if we grow more compactly, we'll have a better chance to take advantage of transit options and such. So we've been doing this since the mid-90s. We have no statutory authority to require communities to grow in different ways, but we've worked around that. We don't tell any community what to do, but we provide basically 3 buckets of opportunities to work in this area. First, we do education and outreach. We have a variety of publications that share best practices for local policies, state policies, regional policies that communities can adopt to get better environmental, community, economic outcomes from growth. We do policy analysis. We look at the way, for instance, many states have school siting requirements that basically require large sites, right? And those are barriers to getting communities to build schools, in the centers of communities, which will, again, allow folks a variety of different ways to get to and from school. And then we do technical assistance. We have a very small budget. 10 years ago or so, we used to give out a lot of dollars in grants. We found that we had less control over how those dollars were spent. So instead, we've been packaging assistance to communities through our contract vehicles. That basically means communities have opportunities to apply to our program for assistance on reforming codes, comprehensive planning, coming up with strategies on how to invest in transit or other transportation infrastructure. We provide that through contractors, experts in urban design, experts in planning and transportation planning. Very small pots of money that we can bring to your community through a variety of programs that we have, including our sort of flagship programs, the Smart Growth Implementation Assistance Program. We work with 4 or 5 communities a year on challenges like I just described. We have a Greening America's Capitals program where we're setting out to work with every capital plus the District of Columbia on a green infrastructure or urban design project. We'll have, by the end of this fiscal year, worked with 10 of the 51 capitals. We have a smaller program that we bring maybe $10,000, $15,000 worth of technical assistance to your community. We call that our Building Blocks program. We're working with between 50 and 60 communities this year. We have sort of special technical assistance. We've worked very closely with FEMA beginning in 2009 and working with communities that are recovering from floods or other natural disasters. And then I don't know if there are any regions here from Appalachia or close. We are working with the Appalachian Regional Commission over the next year to bring technical assistance where we're really trying to connect new ideas related to economic development and land use. And then I'll finish up with one last thing. Our colleagues, just like DOT and HUD, we have colleagues out in the regions. All of our regional colleagues are working with their HUD colleagues, the DOT colleagues, USDA colleagues, and colleagues from other federal agencies to make sure that when you all are beginning your work and you're on the ground, you know what other federal agencies are bringing investments to your region so that you can begin to be part of helping to align those investments with the investments that you're getting here from HUD. So I think I'll end there for now.
Okay, that's great. Chris.
Good morning. Am I on?
Yeah, you are.
So I guess I'd start with a question. How many of you here are from what you consider to be a rural area? Wow. Of those of you who didn't raise your hands, how many of you either anticipate your process is going to involve rural communities in some way, or you're directly involved with rural communities? So it's almost all of us.
Yeah, that's right.
And I think we tend to forget what the impact of the U.S. Department of Agriculture is throughout all of America. It's not just rural America. It is urban America. Even within our own agency, I think we forget the impact we have on urban communities. So we are not a formal partner to the partnership, but we are involved, and we work with the other three agencies as much as we can. We don't have all the resources to do, we have very few resources actually to do planning. But through our rural development programs, which are primarily targeted to small communities, we invest over $20 billion a year, mostly through loans, for rural infrastructure. Over $20 billion a year is invested in rural communities on infrastructure. It's a big number. And we haven't had the planning resources in the past to help guide that infrastructure. So I think part of the goal of the partnership is to figure out, by providing planning resources to your communities, and hopefully more in the years to come, we can do a better job of shaping how those rural infrastructure investments are made. The 6 livability principles that have been articulated apply just as well in small rural communities as they do in cities and major and large metropolitan areas. There are little tweaks and little aspects of them that apply more, or you could think about them, frame them a little differently. But the core of it is people who live in rural communities want vibrant, safe, clean, healthy communities, as well as people in cities. And so that's part of why we're trying to figure out how we can be more involved with the partnership, and we're grateful for the resources that HUD and DOT and EPA are providing you all to do some of the planning work that will help shape our programs. Should I quit or talk a few? I'll just talk a few. Our main programs involve providing utilities, water, drinking water, sewer, housing, broadband, electric lines. We have a major program in community facilities, which many of you would be interested in, which provides funding in rural small towns for community public facilities of almost any kind. And then we have a large program in business and industry loans as well. But we also have programs that involve farmland protection, providing resources to protect farm and forest land through easements, and that can be in or near urban areas as well. And then we have a small program that supports farmers markets that many of you in cities are involved with or want to be involved with. A number of these also we have a community forestry program which provides a small amount of resources to cities, metro areas for protecting the forest canopy. That's some of the menu of programs we provide. What I would hope would come out of the process you are all involved with is to engage our staff in the field and gain a better understanding of how our programs may be able to help you implement your plans. The fact that some of our programs exist may guide some of your planning. You might not have known about these programs. As you learn more about them, you may say, there's a pot of money here we might be able to access. Let's articulate that in our plan. At the same token, our programs, many of them are old, they're inadequately funded, they need to be retooled. The only way that's going to happen is if an informed citizenry who's engaging with their citizens and their elected officials begins to understand the strengths and limitations of our programs so that you are articulating how our programs need to be retooled. The only way this agencies, programs are going to be reformed, changed, consolidated, expanded, refortified with more resources. The only way that is going to happen is if people like you and your citizens are gaining an understanding of these programs and actually in your planning documents articulating what you'd like to see happen and then engaging your elected officials to work to make that happen. So I see this as a two-way process that you're about to become involved with. It's about you understanding what resources our agencies can provide, but also an ongoing conversation with you about how all of our programs can be improved to meet the modern needs of our communities. That's it.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. So, you know, we didn't really set this up to be just a, you know, laundry list of programs that the federal government can help you access. But indeed, it's really important that as you start on your work, you're also thinking about what do you need to implement these plans? So there's going to be a lot of discussion in your efforts with people in communities, with leaders, about your large goals, whether you're working on a regional plan or a community challenge grant, which is also about creating an idea, a vision of what you're trying to accomplish in a particular area. But always, I would urge you to make sure that you don't put off the thinking about how to begin implementation now. And so part of what you're hearing from this team is the notion that we want to make sure that you understand what resources are out there. We're in some ways acting as facilitators to help you find out about how you might be able to utilize a policy that's been put in place, how to access funding. And as someone who comes from the local level, to me, generally the federal government's programs are just completely opaque. It's so confusing. And so part of what we have taken on here is this notion that we want to be able to open that door up so that for you, you're able to accomplish your goals. For us, we're actually using funding more efficiently, and we're learning about how to fix what's not working now. And so maybe just a couple of things. We'll kind of jump around here, and then we'll open it up for questions. But Matt, one of the things that I was really impressed that your administrator did early on was send a letter to the recipients of the state water revolving loan funds to say, hey, let's try and prioritize investments in existing communities, repairing old, outdated water systems and sewer systems. So can you talk a little bit about what motivated her to do that and what's happening?
Yeah, that's a good point. So, you know, Shelley, you sort of hit on it a little earlier in one of your slides where you just sort of mentioned that, or one of your slides said we can't not afford to make the investments that we were making, the way we were making them. And I guess probably the best way to describe this is we can't afford to have sort of single outcomes from our public investments any longer. We just can't afford it, and we need to start to move towards a place where our investments in everything from transportation infrastructure, et cetera, but from the environmental perspective, protection agency's perspective, if we're going to invest in water and sewer infrastructure, we need those investments to also begin to create other outcomes. So if we invest in if states start to use the state revolving fund dollars to invest in existing communities, not only are we going to be improving water quality outcomes, we're also going to be improving those communities, right? We understand from talking to developers that sometimes there are barriers to doing infill development, and oftentimes those barriers include the lack of water and sewer infrastructure. So if our dollars that we delegate to the states through the state revolving fund are more often than not used to increase water and sewer infrastructure capacity in existing communities, we can get these other outcomes. And I think we're trying to do that all across all the agencies. But as Shelley said, our administrator picked up on that early on in the partnership, and it demonstrates, number one, her commitment to this work. Number two, her understanding of the work, and the way that we at the agency are trying to reform the way we do business in order to get the better outcomes at the communities that you all are working with at this point.
Yeah, and so Lily, one of the things that I think is really often challenging, actually for all of us, is that, well, for instance, HUD, 2/3 of our employees are not at headquarters, they're in the field. And the majority of the funds that we give, as DOT has mentioned, go out as formula funds, which is great because it means that locals can decide how to use those funds. Until you want to begin to shape and change that, and getting agreement with your federal agency partner is often really tricky. So one of the things that I think DOT is really taking on is this notion of culture change within their broader agency, setting up training programs so that folks in FHWA can really educate themselves about this. Federal Transit Administration has done some stuff. Can you talk a little bit about, that whole, how do we make sure that these folks have local partners that know more about what they're trying to accomplish?
Yeah, absolutely. As I mentioned in my earlier remarks, that creating this culture change within DOT is really the foundation of what we're trying to bring to the partnership. Our division staff and our regional staff are very well aware of the partnership, and we've tried to integrate them into the management of the grants that we give out. So all of our grants are managed not at headquarters, but at the regional and the state level, so that it's more of an ongoing dialogue between the federal staff that are outside of headquarters and DC, and more of a sort of continuing relationship with cities and towns that are administering grants such as that.
Mm-hmm. Chris, now.
Yeah, I'll expand on most of our work is done in the field. We are blessed amongst the four of us of having an unusual situation where we have a state director, a presidential appointed state director in every state who administers our primary infrastructure programs, so utilities, business, and housing community facilities. So the best way for you all, the good news is the best way for you all is to actually call someone in your state. Many of them will have offices in or near your communities, but I would encourage you, and you will get information about locations and contact information for our state directors for rural development. But these are the people you need to start with, and if they're not responsive, then you come back to your GTRs here, and they'll contact me, and
that's right.
We'll open doors. And sometimes people aren't responsive because they don't know about the program, or they do and they just missed the email, because we all know about email, right? So be vigilant about reaching out to, if you think there may be a role for USDA to play in your community. And again, it may not just be rural. I mean, there may be some urban programs, very small, but that might have might be a door to some of our programs. Reach out to those state directors, engage them to come to your communities, or you go meet with them, whatever works, and start that dialogue. So it's a little bit of burden on you all.
Yeah, I think we should open it up for questions, and if people could come up to the mic. I know it's a little crowded, but I know you can do it. We'll have a little bit of a Q&A session, and then
so while we're waiting for folks to come up, let me just sort of touch on this, that I believe that in each of our regions, in the 10 regions that cover that HUD and DOT.
Oh yeah, there's
already,
federal region map, and then there's this metro regions that we have here.
I think from the federal regional perspective, there are many of our colleagues have already done some of the outreach to USDA partners, and so as Chris sort of said, sort of think about reaching out to the state directors, but also use some of the, or leverage some of the contacts that have already been made through the HUD regional offices.
Yeah, good.
And if I could just add one more, there's a website link that should be up on the screens, sustainablecommunities.gov, and all of the contact information for these federal partners in the states is on that website. So email addresses and phone numbers are there to make it easier to figure out who you need to call.
Please introduce yourself and
I'll be brief. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, my name's Howard Brown. I'm the planning director for the City of Opelika. We're one of the Community Challenge grantees, and I'm joined with our grants manager and some of our nonprofit partners as well. One of the questions that I have, and it's really to, I think, Ms. Osborne, it's related to Tiger discretionary funding. And I just heard you say earlier that a lot of the money, a substantial amount of the money, it goes to the state DOTs. And, you know, our city, of course, like most cities, we've applied for Tiger discretionary funds and unfortunately weren't granted the funding. And does it follow the state DOT MPO planning process? Is that is that the whole kick to us getting awarded? Or you got any advice for a small city to get awarded?
Well, I will start by saying the Tiger program is incredibly oversubscribed, so we are only able to fund about 5% of the applications that we receive. So you're not alone in wondering what happened. I will say that all of the Tiger program or projects that we fund are the result or have to be included in state transportation long-range plans or in a statewide transportation improvement plan. So they do have to be consistent with the state's vision for the transportation system. But as I mentioned in my remarks, if it's a result of a regional planning or a community planning process, that certainly is looked on very highly and favorably in the review of those grants.
Okay.
And so, but just to dig down a little bit further, so say I'm from a smallish community in a bigger metro area, and I want to apply to do some complete streets work on a really fast arterial street. Does that actually end up in the state transportation plan, or is that just, you know, a policy that the state might say, we're going to try and calm traffic?
Sure. Well, the Tiger program is a construction implementation program. So if you wanted to be funding the sort of retrofit or redesign of that street, it would be something that the statewide, the State Transportation Agency or the Metropolitan Planning Organization would be aware of and have that included.
So it sounds like we're probably going to have to get into their transportation improvement program some kind of way.
That's right.
Before we make the application,
Right.
sounds like to me. And then, okay, all right.
Yeah.
But let me just point out that your grant funds can be used to work on that activity.
All right. Here, here. Thank you very much. Thank you all.
Thank you.
I am Vicki Bott with Central Iowa Council of Governments in Charlotte, North Carolina. I'm here with two of my colleagues. And we have a two-part question. First, you talked, Shelley, about the ways that the regional planning grants, particularly for Category 1, you want us to be thinking about how can we then go further when we complete that with implementation. So one of the questions I have is, do you all have as a partnership a resource, a database that lets us look up all of the different grants that all of your agencies have that relate to sustainable communities work, and that, and in particular, those that award preferred sustainability status merit points?
Yeah, so two parts to that answer,
that was the
and
first
my
part,
colleagues
okay.
can jump in. So on this website, sustainablecommunities.gov, we are working to continue to identify federal programs that can be used to implement plans that you're creating through this grant program. This is actually a priority for us this year, is to continue to do this. Amazingly, this never existed. So in some ways, we're kind of starting from scratch. Preferred sustainability status, for those of you who are just hearing about this for the first time, it's a new program that HUD has piloted, where any of your communities, because you received funding through this grant program, get this designation, preferred sustainability status. At this point, when you apply to a list of about 15 HUD discretionary grant programs. This is not community development block grant monies, but monies to build housing and other kind of community services at this point. You go into that program, or an applicant in your community goes into this program with additional bonus points. And it's our way of trying to recognize that you're trying to do that integrated work, the placemaking work that's going to align and leverage funding. Now, we are in the middle of conversations about the extent to which we can formally connect that with other federal programs, but we're already seeing some voluntary efforts by our partners here to recognize communities that are in this program. So, Lily, what are the programs that you have already identified?
Well, as I mentioned, the Tiger program includes that sort of cross-reference to other planning programs. We also have the consideration in our bus livability grants that the Transit Administration administers, and the Federal Highway Administration TCSP, Transportation System Community Preservation Grants program.
And at EPA, we are, it's kind of as Shelley mentions, I mean, we are in the process of, we're trying to figure out how, we're using the term reciprocity. We're really trying to figure out how we can, value the efforts that you all have done in your communities as it relates to the grants and programs you get from other agencies. It's a tough lift, but we have support from our leadership to get it done, and now it's a matter of figuring out how to get it done. And it's primarily through the Brownfields program, I think, is the first place we're going to start. We have more funds that come out of the Brownfields program probably than any other part of the agency that's working on sustainable communities at this point, and that's the first place it will start.
And Matt, you sort of addressed the second part, which is the expansion of programs for which PSS applies. And so I'll add a third part. What can we do to help you in that effort?
Well, okay, so this will be just a commercial break for, reciprocity on preferred sustainability status and other things. You may not be aware that you are right now in the middle of a hermetically sealed bubble that is very hard to penetrate. And one of the things that I have found is that collectively, we do not say what we want enough. To our federal partners, to our members of Congress. If you think that there is value in a reciprocity program for this effort or whatever, say it, please, because one of the things we're finding is the message just doesn't get through, and maybe it's because we're all very humble and don't want to toot our horns, but really actually that's what makes change happen here.
And let me just kind of follow up on that and just say that there are other folks who are beyond this room who are interested in the same thing, and finding them is really helpful. And for you in North Carolina, find Ron Townley in Land of Sky Regional Council, because it's a big deal for him. And if the 2 of you and 8 of you and 15 of you start to make this argument, it's going to be helpful.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, can I just sort of
Please.
expand on that? As I think about what all of you are doing, this is a 3-year process. You are going to be engaging hundreds of people, hopefully, in all of your community. This is an exercise in democracy. In some ways, that's more important than the plan itself or some of the projects you do. Yeah. We talk about changing the culture in our agencies, which we're working on all the time, and it's really hard. But really, to change the culture in our agencies and to get the projects, programs, policies that you folks want, it's kind of in your court. It's your people. It's how the richness of that dialogue occurs. There will be bumps. There are going to be people in your community who feel threatened by this, who don't like it. It'll be your jobs to sort of help them get over those bumps and engage them in the process to make these programs work better together, to consolidate, to get more money from wherever you get it, whether it's state DOTs or Congress or wherever. It's really up to you guys. So what is so exciting to me about these planning processes is the opportunity for community engagement to shape all the stuff we're trying to do. That's a broad comment, but I can't say it enough.
That's exactly right. Okay, last comment, actually. I think we'll have to take our other Opa-locka colleague next time.
I'm John Carnegie from Rutgers University, representing the North Jersey Sustainable Communities Consortium.
Yes.
The first part of my question was actually answered, I think, through the database answer that you just described, because we're getting a lot of questions from our potential partners, you know, what are we gaining access to by participating in this other than just the planning process?
Okay.
The questions have gone beyond, though, just funding programs and have breached into the area of technical resources and sort of priority access to technical resource and knowledge and things like that. Do we have a sort of open door invitation to have any of our partners, whatever you need, suggest it, and then we have a vehicle for getting that answer from any of the agencies that might be involved?
Well, a qualified yes.
Okay.
In the HUD program that you're here for, we have created just this last year a capacity builders program.
Right.
And it has kind of 3 levels to it. You're going to hear more about this, I think, in the program in detail, but just because this will just immediately answer some of your questions. The first is a set of training materials, best practices, information on the field at large around a certain set of issues that people in this program over the last year have said that they have needs in. Data gathering, performance measures, scenario planning, community engagement, water resources planning, implementation tools. So there'll be a broad set of resources available to anyone who's a partner in your consortium. We also have set up a series of what we're calling learning networks. These are really opportunities for grantees to engage across, places. And there again, if you have an active member in one of your consortia that really wants to participate in one of these learning networks, you should be able to offer that to them. Okay. We have some resources set aside, which we're holding quite tightly, on direct technical assistance. So if you are running into a serious challenge, dealing with a particular issue, needs some capacity to be able to do it, we can consider providing that directly to you. But I would also mention that EPA's technical assistance programs that Matt mentioned earlier, they are open to be able to access for anyone who's in your network. DOT is increasingly doing more and more webcasts and place-based training programs, so they'll have access to those. So again, we're trying to open up as much as we can for that.
Let me just jump in and say that, kind of personalize this for a second. I'm a planner. I'm trained as a planner. I think I have the best job in the world because I get to think about the challenges that are going on in communities across the entire country. I never get bored with my job. I actually love coming to work, right? So one of the strategic performance metrics that we have is in our office is to work in 600 communities over a 5-year period. That's a lot of communities. And we have a technical assistance program. I tried to describe it before. You all will be informed about when the application process for that comes up. That technical assistance primarily is done, again, through we provide services. We want you, when you apply, we want you to tell us that you're a HUD grantee. I mean, we have a better ability to make decisions on that than through the grant process, which you all just went through. That's the first thing. The second thing is, if someone calls from your grant or any grant from here, calls our office, calls me, sends me an email, sends one of my colleagues an email, you're going to get a response from us, and we're going to do the best that we can to match you up with the type of resources that you're looking for, whether it's just knowledge or a publication or someone who's working on the same challenge that you've got. And we'd like to do that with every call and every email that we get, but I mean, that's the secret. You guys are going to get the answer first because of this partnership. So I'll leave my cards here. You can get in touch with us through this, but we want this to happen.
That's good to hear, because I've been telling everybody that they get priority access to information and knowledge from all the federal agencies.
And we're going to back you up when you go back home.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's thank our panel. Okay.
We're going to have several props over the day and a half. I want to introduce you to the first one. This is how HUD sees the world.
And EPA sees the world that way, too.
Or at least one way they see the world. These are the HUD regions, and you'll learn over time which region you're in. I only bring this map up because we're going to do introductions by HUD region. And so before we go to a short break, I would like all the people who are in Region 1 or Region 2 to stand up. That's New York, New Jersey, and New England. That's New York, New Jersey, New England. Now stay standing. If you're not sure if you're from New York, New Jersey, New England, you probably aren't. And we're going to go around real quick and just have you say your name and the grant you're with. And then once we finish those who are standing, we'll take a break until about 5 after 10. And then we'll get into our nuts and bolts on the grant program, a reprise of what we heard a couple weeks ago by webinar. We'll start right here. All right, Jeff. Courtesy of the grant.
We didn't hire him specifically for the grant. We hired him for other reasons. It happens to be his birthday.
There you go.
National Regional Planning Commission, all 9 regional planning commissions in the state on a regional.
Is there anyone hiding behind that column there? That's it. Okay, so when we're back at 5 after 10, when the cameras do their pan across the tables, they'll be devoid of food and beverage. So thank you.